Hello and welcome to another A1 video. If a million people were to actually storm Area 51, would they be allowed to kill them all? Okay, let's do some math because it's Friday evening as I write this with a cold beer in one hand, and I like math on the other hand. Exactly how do 1 million idiots coordinate their attack? By definition, these are not the smartest of humans, but let us suppose that somehow they all manage to get to the posted outskirts of an active US military installation. Clearly, the military brass gets constant updates as short school bus load after short school bus load drops off the attackers, about 20 to 30 at a time. It takes a while for everyone to show up. Like, at one bus a minute, it takes almost 28 days for 1 million people to arrive, 25 per minute. But then let's assume these particular people are smart enough to have figured out how to bring enough stuff, food, water, clothing, tents, porta toilets, and so on, to survive what are basically desert conditions for a month while everybody arrives. Assuming a gallon of water and 2 pounds of food for every person, and assuming the linear rate of arrival above, and just food and water add up to about 10 pounds per person per day, just for last day before the attack is 20 million pounds of consumables, 10,000 tons, about 250 tractor-trailer truckloads full. Okay, let's assume there are some logistics savants amongst the troglodytes and a couple wacky billionaires to pay for all that. It's showtime. Everyone brought a walkie-talkie because of course they did, and everyone is tuned to the same channel, and somebody gives the signal and the whole mass of knuckleheads forms a wall of humans 10 deep, and, since there are a million people, by definition 100,000 wide. Assuming they are marching close together, that is one person every 3 feet, so 100,000 people is a wall about 6.3 miles wide. And they are walking. Trying to maintain spacing and form something like a line, they can't go too fast over uneven desert terrain. I think it is generous to say they go 1 mile per hour at best, and from the outskirts of the base, where the welcome sign is, to a point the military might think this is a real threat is about 15 miles. In other words, our giant clownfist is going to take an entire day walking from the front gate to the actual base. Again, needing 250 truckloads of 10,000 tons of provisions along the way. But here is the best part: the military had decided almost a month ago to pack up and just leave. No drama, no shooting, no problem. I mean, the place develops airplane tech. They just fly away. 1 million mouth breathers descend slowly upon a bunch of empty aircraft hangars, empty Quonset huts, empty storerooms. 1 million people get disappointed. And probably a bit annoyed. Because it's going to take a month of short school buses to get them all back home. If 3 million people actually storm Area 51, will the military actually kill them all? Will that cause massive public backlash? First of all, it's a hoax, so forget it, it's not happening. Second of all, where would those 3 million people all stay before the raid? Surely they have to gather somewhere? The only big city even remotely near Area 51 is Las Vegas. Greater Las Vegas has a population of 2 million total. There is nowhere near enough room for 3 million people to stay there all on one night. Also, the airport won't be able to handle that many people coming into town all at once, and there certainly aren't enough rental cars in the area to support so many people. Assuming you find a place for all of those 3 million to stay, and somehow they stagger their flights so they come into town the weeks and months before the raid and somehow get enough cars. Area 51 is a 2-hour drive on a 2-lane highway 150 miles from Las Vegas. There is only one or at best 2 roads going there. All it takes for to stop all those cars is one roadblock on the highway. It doesn't have to be anywhere near the base. Once the first cars get stopped at the roadblock, the resulting traffic jam will ensure that 90% of the remaining cars get stuck in traffic and never get close to the roadblock. If all those people want to try walking 100 miles through the desert through an Air Force base, good luck with that. Lately here in Las Vegas we have been having record-breaking heat. A lot of the people will probably die of heat stroke. The military doesn't have to kill anyone, the police will stop them. Being an airbase, what is to prevent the Air Force from using the runways to fly the aliens that the people are after out of Area 51 to some other base anywhere else in the US? What is to prevent the base's runways from being used to bring in military and civilian police from the rest of the US to serve as reinforcements? If 2 million people actually try to storm Area 51, should the military use deadly force to stop them? How many deaths should be justified to keep Area 51 classified from the public side? I'm not certain why people cannot get this. Nevada has just over 3 million people in the entire state. It doesn't have the facilities to accommodate an additional 500,000, much less 2 million who would try to get to it. That alone would cause more deaths than any attempt to storm Area 51 might. But let's play what if. What if the highway patrol allowed people who are obviously trying to get to Area 51 past the checkpoints that they'll set up? Highway 375, the only paved route to the area, is a narrow two-lane highway with large areas without shoulders. It would only take about 10,000 vehicles on it to make the highway impassable. People would die when their vehicles broke down, and there would be no way for them to easily escape the area. What if the military allowed civilians to turn down one of the unimproved roads that lead to the site? People who didn't bring four-wheel drives would soon break down, and their vehicles would block the roads. At best, a few thousand cars, trucks and SUVs could travel down the road, which could easily be blocked by concrete barriers or even a parked vehicle. People who tried to drive around would get stuck or have their vehicles damaged. What if the military didn't stop people whose vehicles broke down from getting out of those vehicles and wandering around in the desert? Then more people would die. Besides the lack of water and the heat, there are venomous snakes in the area, there are hidden drop-offs, and there's no shade. After a few hours of stumbling around, dozens, if not hundreds, of people would be suffering from heat exhaustion or heat stroke, and they would die without immediate medical attention. The death toll could easily rise into the low thousands if people of all ages, including children, attempted to press forward. What if the military allowed people to struggle the 15-20 miles through the desert to reach Area 51's perimeter? Well, before that occurred, the military would have relocated anything really classified to Area 6 on the test site or to other facilities. What they didn't relocate they would place in containers or store in buildings which cannot be easily accessed from the outside. The hours that people spent trying to get to the site would be rewarded by a bunch of locked buildings and nothing to see. And that's before you'd be arrested and detained. What needs to be hammered into the skulls of people who are seriously considering this is that Area 51's remoteness and harsh biosphere are more security than it really needs. Large numbers of people cannot get to the turnoff leading to the site, much less to the site itself, without facing serious injury or even death. And even if you manage to get to the site, the military will simply move or lock up whatever there is to see, making it a wasted trip, followed by an expensive arrest and several lengthy series of court proceedings. And that would be for the few hundred or thousand who could rationally even get there. 2 million people is a number so absurd that it can be quickly dismissed. There's no place within 500 miles of Area 51 that could accommodate that large of an influx, and most people would find themselves either stuck in massive traffic jams or turned away by the highway patrol rather than allowing them to run out of gas and water in the desert. The military would never have to fire a shot. Would 1 million people really be able to storm Area 51? If not, how many people? So, let's kick the ballistics here. Speaking of nothing except logistics. So, I'm presuming that this 1 million people will fly into Las Vegas. Right away, things start getting jammed up, though not impossible yet. McCarran International Airport in Las Vegas typically handles around 100,000 visitors per day. If these stormers bought up all the flights coming in, it would take a week or so to get 1 million people on site. Where would the first people to arrive stay while waiting for the last people? Well, Vegas is almost entirely a tourist town, hosting around 3-4 million visitors a month as it is, but 1 million extra people at once would be a challenge. There are around 150,000 hotel rooms in the entire city. That means that the stormers would have to organize themselves 6 or 7 to a room by the time everyone was in town, and that's assuming that no other tourists were in town at the time. It would also really stretch the entire town's resources. Food, water, etc. But it wouldn't completely overwhelm things, so let's assume the town could handle it. More to the point, we can assume some people might drive into town, but most of them are going to be flying. I don't know how many rental cars are available in the entire city of Las Vegas, but I guarantee you it's not 1 million. Still, let's kludge that and assume that you manage to organize your 1 million people in 200,000 vehicles, then you set off for Area 51. Now the real problems start. 200,000 vehicles trying to convoy along a 2-lane divided highway is kind of a problem. Allowing for a car every 50 feet, which is really much closer than you should be driving, and filling both lanes, that convoy would stretch for 5 million feet, or around 950 miles. That's kind of a problem, right? I mean, it's only 70 miles from Las Vegas to where you'd want to get off the highway. So the entire road would be filled with less than 10% of your people in place. Even if you packed the cars bumper to bumper, it would still stretch for multiple times that length. So, first problem. Where do we park? Or maybe you're not planning to park, maybe you're planning to drive right up to Area 51. That means you're turning off onto a single-lane road through the empty desert, which means the line of cars would take up twice as much space. But let's say you're in the lead car, so full speed ahead, right? So, now, you're not so much a storming mob as you are a long line of tourists stretch out along a single road, going back nearly 100 miles, with most of your people still back in Las Vegas. Let's take an aside here to point out that, statistically, around 1 person in 500 is peeing at any given time, and 1 person in 1,000 will need to poop. That means that thousands of these cars will constantly be pulling over, allowing someone to relieve themselves by the side of the road, and then trying to work back into the, let's say, flow of traffic. Statistically, out of 1 million people, some of them are going to have medical emergencies, some are going to get into wrecks and/or get into fights. And everyone is locked into this long convoy with no way to get back or hurry forward. So problems are going to exist throughout. But now that you're off the highway, here's something to take a look at. That little yellow box is your target. Those big gray and orange boxes? Those are all military land. AKA, places you're not allowed to go. And it's a good 30 miles from the time you leave the highway until you get there. So, let's go back to you, in the lead car. You're 30 miles from your destination, and the military, who have clearly seen this coming a long way off, have parked a couple of Humvees across the road, and there are a couple of, perhaps less than friendly young men carrying automatic weapons, rather aggressively inviting you to turn back. In real life, you'd turn back and save face. But we've already brought 1 million people this far, onwards and upwards. Problem, though, you don't have 1 million people. Most of them are still back in Vegas, remember? You've got the 4 people in your car, and the car's immediately behind you. If you refuse to get out, you'll be dragged from the car and arrested, and your vehicle will now be part of the roadblock. If you try to ram the Humvee, you'll just crash into it, probably be injured, and once again be very roughly dragged out and arrested. If you shout out now and try to either drive or run off into the desert around the roadblock, maybe a couple of dozens others will see what you're doing and try to join you. Most of the others will still be far enough back down the road that they have no idea anything's happening. Most of the people who try to drive off the road will quickly become stuck, as they're driving rental cars that aren't designed for this. Those people on foot, along with those few people driving off-road vehicles, will quickly be intercepted by MPs, who will be driving vehicles designed for this terrain. Anyone who refuses to stop when blocked by these MPs will be assumed to be trying to run them down and be met with deadly force. Those apprehended on foot will be very roughly apprehended. Anyone on foot who manages to escape notice will find themselves trying to run through 30 miles of desert in the blazing sun, presumably with little in the way of water and supplies, over an active military testing range. I'm guessing that, in a mile or two, they'll be shouting and waving and begging to be arrested. My point in all this is that you're not going to have 1 million people storming the base at the same time, you're not going to have 10,000 people at the same time. The logistics of such a thing would be too complicated, the infrastructure unavailable, and the organization profoundly lacking. Even if you had 1 million people who wanted to do it, they'd simply be incapable. If the 250,000 people who said they would storm Area 51 actually did it, what would the possible outcomes be? What would most likely happen in this hypothetical situation? The largest mass arrest in US history was 12,000 people. The government physically cannot detain many more people at once without specialized infrastructure. With this in mind, I see a couple options. 250,000 people show up with picket signs and protest leaders. They strike in front of Area 51 for several days as media pressure mounts. Then the US government gives in and permits the people to examine Area 51, where they find nothing of interest. Area 51 is a Cold War-era Air Force facility. Give them a few days to hide the important stuff, and they can give guided tours all day long. 250,000 people show up and storm past the fences and barriers. Soldiers line guns and tensions mount. Some civilians had brought guns with them, and one goes off. The soldiers open fire and the people panic. By the end of the day 20,000 people are dead and hundreds of thousands more are injured. We started several wars where over 500,000 people died just because 2 planes killed 4,000 people. This might legitimately start a civil war. 250,000 people show up and Naruto run past the soldiers. They find the government's secret store of aliens and they Naruto run back out. All of the guns jam. What do you think will actually happen at the Storm Area 51 event? Nothing good. I think there are a lot more people who are curious about it than there are people who are actually committed to breaching the fence line in the face of opposition. There's a number of ways that this could go down. Only a handful of people actually show up, and they end up chickening out and drowning their sorrows at a bar in Vegas. Thousands of people actually go through with it. They make for the gate. Hundreds get arrested because the military has access to Facebook and prepared to arrest a whole bunch of people. Those who don't want to go to jail will quickly disperse when they realize they'll never get through the gate. Thousands will go, and the guards will actually use deadly force, as they are authorized to do. Once the first dozen or so fall, the rest will realize they don't feel like dying for this particular cause and will flee. By some miracle, some will get through the gate. The military, not wanting a bloodbath on their hands, will end up giving a nickel tour to a handful of them to prove to them that there are no aliens there. Most won't believe it and will continue to claim that they didn't get to see everything. By some miracle, they are more determined than we give them credit for. They overwhelm the security and take the workers hostage. They then scour every square inch of the place before realizing that it's just been a flight test facility for prototype military aircraft all along, and there's no aliens or alien tech to be found. Disenchanted, they throw up their hands in disgust before spending the rest of their lives in prison. Maybe the military actually is hiding aliens there. They use the alien tech to vaporize the people. Maybe the military actually is hiding aliens there, but they have access to Facebook and know the people are coming, so they move everything off-site. Maybe the military actually is hiding aliens there, and they decide to just come clean about the whole thing, admitting that the spacecraft were kept there ever since Roswell. What would happen if a group of thousands of American citizens stormed Area 51's and demanded answers? Typically, intruders are apprehended at gunpoint after entering the secured zone, but before they can actually breach base security. However, with this being a mob, base security will not attempt any apprehensions. While the exact protocol is, like everything else in Area 51, classified, the following is my best guess as to the steps taken. As soon as the mob enters the security zone outside the base, loudspeakers will begin broadcasting a warning to withdraw and disperse. At 1 kilometer from the base perimeter, the warning will become more hostile, reminding the mob that lethal force has been authorized and nearby units will be advised of the situation. At 600 meters, warning shots will be fired and reinforcements will be called for. U.S. military doctrine does not allow warning shots. Ever. At 500 meters, base security will deem a breach of security an unacceptably high risk and open fire on the mob, with full intention to kill. The base will go to full alert. At 200 meters, if the mob hasn't broken and run, base security will institute a full lockdown and call for immediate assistance from any and all rapid response forces able to react. At 0 meters, base security will declare the base in immediate danger of being overrun and will be requesting immediate air support and, if available, artillery support. At this point, the mob will cease being considered a mob and be considered enemy combatants. Land and air reinforcements will arrive, and anyone not a member of Area 51's personnel and staff will be fired upon, willful intention to kill, and any survivors will be detained indefinitely as domestic terrorists. Something I'd like to remind anyone thinking of doing this. Area 51 is one of the most highly secretive locations in the world. The claim that lethal force has been authorized to maintain this secrecy is not an empty bluff. The personnel assigned to guard this site will face absolutely no negative repercussions from the United States military or government for firing upon and killing anyone, United States citizens or otherwise, who attempts to breach base security. Do not provoke Area 51. Thank you for watching. Please don't forget to like, share, subscribe the video.